So, as I was saying earlier, I first entered the ministry process in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, and I was a member here for about 7 years before that. And I began by attending Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California, which is one of 2 Unitarian Universalist seminaries in the country. And so for a year, the year online, and then my family and I moved to Berkeley for a year, and we attended in person. And while I was there, one of my professors was the Reverend Dr. Dorsey Blake, an African-American gentleman, a minister in the Christian church, who taught at Star King School for the Ministry. He's not there anymore. He's at PSR next door now, but at the time he was. And I did an independent study with him on the black church, the African-American church. And I worked with him to find churches in the area that I could attend. I read books so that I could learn about the African-American experience of church and what that was like. The first church that he sent me to was Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland, California. It's a fairly large church, 2,000 to 3,000 members, in a part of Oakland where when I was done, I rode the train down there and I took a bus, got off the bus and walked in, didn't think anything of it. Afterwards, a woman was walking out with me and she said, "Oh, how did you get here?" And I told her, and she said, "Why don't I give you a ride to the train station?" She said, "I wouldn't want you to stand at the bus stop for very long." And when we went to her car, there was a 10-foot razor wire fence around the parking lot and a police officer standing guard. This is the part of Oakland it was in. Let's say a somewhat sketchy part of Oakland. But it was a beautiful church. And I walked in. I didn't know anybody. I hadn't called ahead or anything. And I was greeted by some folks sitting at a table there in their kind of narthex foyer area. And I said, "Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm visiting from the seminary, and I'm here to see what your service is like." And they said, "Oh, great. Have you eaten?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Oh, well, come. Let's see if they've already put the food away." And they took me into the fellowship hall, and they were like, "Oh, the food's already put away, but let me find something for you." And they ran off into the kitchen, and they came back with a plate of eggs and potatoes. And they said, "Here you go. So I'm sorry, the meat's already gone." And I thought, I don't have to explain that I'm a vegetarian. That's good. And I ate, surprised by their hospitality. And after I ate, I went and started wandering into the service with hundreds of other people. Not all 2,000 or 3,000 attend service every week, of course, and they broadcast the services to those who are homebound and can't come. As I'm walking in, there's a greeter at the door, and he greets me and hands me a program and says, "How are you doing today?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing fine." And he says, "What brings you here?" I said, "Oh, I'm visiting from the seminary. My name's Andrew Young." He said, "Oh, great. We're so glad to have you. Come on in." So I went and I sat down in kind of the middle of the sanctuary so I could observe everything. And I don't know how many of you have been to an African-American Baptist church service, but it is an experience that you should do. If you've never experienced it before, you should definitely go. It's fantastic. There's music, there's singing, there's dancing. It was amazing. I was the only non-African-American person in the whole building except for the saxophonist, which I thought was rather hilarious. Worship started, minister came up, gave a welcome, said, "Welcome to our visitors who are here today. And we want to give a special welcome to Andrew Young, who's visiting from the Graduate Theological Union up in Berkeley." And I was like, "Oh no." "Please stand, Andrew." So I stood. "Pass him a mic." So they passed me a microphone. "Tell us a little about yourself." "Oh, I'm Andrew and I'm visiting from the seminary." Thank God I was not an introvert. Thank God my wife did not go with me that day because it would have been horrible. But it was a great experience. The sermon was great. And in this kind of church, when the minister is preaching, as the minister starts kind of low and they get revved up, and then the music kicks in, and the music goes up with them as they're getting more revved up. And it was about a 2-hour worship service. About an hour and a half into it, the minister is really in the middle of what he wants to say, and he's talking about the oppressed in our society. He's talking about the homeless and the poor and the racial minorities. And then he says, "And we must not forget our LGBT brothers and sisters." He says, "If we forget them in their time of need, we will be hypocrites." And I was shocked. absolutely shocked. You see, I had come that morning with a bunch of preconceived notions about what a traditionally African-American Baptist church in the heart of Oakland, California would be like. And it was not what I expected. It was welcoming. It was kind. It was highly progressive. Let me tell you the story of another visitation I made. When I moved back to Austin and was attending seminary at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, not far from here, there's an Episcopal church right across the road. Now, the Episcopal church, very progressive. They're currently in trouble with the Anglican Union, which is the international gathering of Anglicans, because they support same-sex marriage, and the Anglican Union as a whole does not yet. Very progressive. I thought, I'm going to have a great time. I love high church service. So I go in, the greeter says, "Good morning," hands me a order of service, which really just has the hymns on it. No other order. It's just the hymns. I walk in, I sit down, nobody talks to me. Pick up the 2 books, neither of which, by the way, have a label on them. You're expected to know which one is the Book of Common Prayer and which one is the hymnal, because one's one color and one's another, and everybody knows that, obviously. They began the service. The Episcopalians do a service rote. They just do it straight down the book. They're actually not allowed to go off notes. And the service begins on something like page 325. And if you don't know that, it's hard to know what's going on. Open the hymnal, start flipping around, looking for the words they're saying, drastic, couldn't find it. Someone finally said, page 325. Okay, so it's 325. Don't know when to stand or sit or kneel. Have to just kind of watch everybody around me. They do communion, don't tell us what to do. They just assume we know. So I wander up the aisle and make a fool of myself by turning the wrong way and going back the wrong way from the altar. Got up at the end of the service and left, and no one said goodbye. I had preconceived notions about this church also. I thought progressive church, center of Austin, historic building, it's going to be wonderful. People are going to welcome me. That was not what I got. And the message, although it certainly wasn't a bad message, was not particularly progressive. It's your standard kind of, love of God message, but it didn't stir me to any kind of change or action in my life. See, we have these pre-made judgments. And they've always existed. They existed in Jesus' day. One of the reasons why I like Jesus is that he was a radical in his own day. He was someone who ate with tax collectors and Pharisees. He was someone who refused to do what everyone said you had to do. And he was executed by the state because of his refusal to go with the status quo. And nobody liked him. Everyone questioned him. The Pharisees asked him, "Why do you eat with tax collectors? They're horrible people. Can't you see they're selling us out to the Romans?" And his disciples asked, "Why do you eat with Pharisees? Don't you see they're the problem? They're the thing we're fighting against. Why do you eat with them?" Our prejudices and our preconceived notions of people can prevent us from making actual connections. Let's go back to something I said before the sermon. How many of you were concerned when you came in and saw me in a collar this morning? Be honest. Yeah. The collar is a tricky symbol. For many years, especially a white, cis, heterosexual man wearing a collar has been a sign of the patriarchy, a sign of abusive theology in churches. I'm sure many of you have an experience of being raised in a church where you felt that their theology and their understanding of God was something that you just could not do because it was harmful. And this collar, to many people, means that. And yet, there's no reason why it should. A symbol is just a symbol, and we can reclaim it. And so I try to wear the collar with my rainbow pin, which I don't know if y'all can see out there, whenever I get the chance. Unfortunately, I can't wear it at my own church. I've been asked not to. for fear of scaring away the visitors. So if you're a visitor here today, know that the normal minister does not wear a collar, so it's fine. Except, at protests and things where we want to be visible as ministers. But I have a friend, Joanna Crawford, who is the minister in charge of Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Church in Cedar Park. And she wears a collar all the time with her rainbow pin. And her favorite place to wear it is to go to St. Arbuck's. And she orders a coffee at St. Arbuck's. Oh, you'll get it in a minute. There you go. And sits, and just sits, and waits for conversation. Because a woman wearing a collar and a rainbow pin, too close to my mic, really messes up people's preconceived notions, right? It really forces them to enter into discussion with one another to find out who they really are. I get it too, but Joanna gets it much more frequently than I do. I've had people ask, do you know what that means? Which I thought was really hilarious. Yes, I know what it means. So, how do we do this? I remember I went to Live Oak before Joanna was there. I went to Live Oak, and it was actually when they were between ministers. We attended a service, and they had a guest speaker, and the guest speaker told this story, and he told, the first half of the story, and then he said, but y'all know how it ends. And I had no idea what he was talking about. He assumed that we'd all come from the same background, that we all had the same ideologies, we all had the same experiences in life. He assumed we'd all heard the story before. You know that one about the donkey? I was like, what donkey? I have no idea what you're talking about. And I felt completely alienated because of that. But we get into these habits. We assume that everyone in the room is like us. Now, if I had come in today not wearing this collar, if I had come in wearing a suit and come up here and spoke and introduced myself as Pastor Andrew Young and not mentioned that I was from a Christian church, you would probably have assumed that I was a Unitarian minister from someplace else. These assumptions can be problematic. We can fall into them. It's not a bad thing. You shouldn't feel guilty because of this. We all do it. I do it. We all have good days and bad days. We all mean well. It's not like we're out to get people. But we sometimes forget that when we get up in the pulpit or when we walk around the church and we're greeting people and we make jokes about Republicans, when we make jokes about gun owners, when we make jokes about people who we think must not be here, we often forget that sometimes they are here. And sometimes by making those jokes, we have pushed them away. People who have come here probably for the same reasons we have, because they have had an experience that has hurt them in their previous church life. And they come and they hear, not only am I not welcomed there, but I am also not welcomed here as who I am. So how do we move past this? And so I want to talk about two concepts borrowed from Christian theology, but also very appropriate to Unitarian Universalist theology: covenant and grace. How many of you have seen the covenant of right relations that is on the wall in Housen Hall? Excellent. If you have not, you should go read it. I was here when they wrote that covenant, and when they wrote this for the first time. I remember all of the work that went into producing that covenant. You would not believe the committee meetings and the arguments and everything. The covenant of right relations gives us a structure to work with in dealing with one another in a way that is fair and equitable. Covenant, originally in the Hebrew scriptures and then again in the Christian scriptures, is about a understanding between two parties. It's like a legal document. In the Old Testament, it was a legal document between God and the people. And yet, the people often broke the document. And then it was up to God to bring them back into covenant. Because covenant is between two people. It's not a document like you sign, like your homeowner's agreement, and if you don't live up to it, they're going to fine you or whatever. It's about being in a relationship, real relationship with somebody. And when they go outside the lines, when they stray, when they've had a bad day and something horrible has happened during the week, and they just are at their wits' end, and you do something small, and they just snap. And they do something far outside of the covenant that you've agreed to. That's when the relationship matters, and you bring them back in. You say, I hear you, and I know that you're hurting, but you're not within our covenant. We've agreed to this. Let's come back. Let's come back into this. And that's where the second thing comes up, which is grace. In the Christian tradition, grace is a gift that you receive even though you do not deserve the gift. When you're having a bad day and you've lashed out at somebody, and I do this all the time. I haven't eaten. I've had a long day. I've been dealing with the death of a congregant or with someone in the hospital or with an angry renter who is trying to work out some new rental agreement for a room. And I'm just so frustrated, and someone comes in and they do something that bugs me, and it's some minor thing, and I just snap and yell at them, right? My daughter knows. But I didn't mean to. I just snapped. And so that is the point when the other party can provide grace. They can say, I understand this is not who you really are and that something must be going on. Tell me about it. Come back into community with me. Let us share together in our community. That's grace. And it's hard. It's not something easy to do, but it's something that we can learn over time. So, as you leave today and go about your regular business, I invite you to think about this. Think about how this religious community and all of the communities that you are a part of, work, social communities, other activities, how can you make them more welcoming to all? How can you be in true relationship with people? How can you put aside your preconceived notions and prejudices and work to understand where people really are and to find common ground on which to build those relationships? How can you create covenants? And how can you bring people back into covenant when they stray? And how can you provide grace for those who have treated you poorly, even though it's not who they really are? Amen.